So welcome everybody. Carolyn Merrick, Program Coordinator here at the Center, and it is my great big huge pleasure to introduce to you today a really great friend of mine. We're just starting a friendship, but it feels like one of those that you just slip on like a great fitting glove, and that's Marilou Maglione. Um, Mary Lou's one of those Renaissance people. She does a little bit of everything, and everything she does really well. So by day, she's the anatomic pathology lab director at the UVA Medical Center. And also by day, she's a NAUI certified dive instructor. This is her 40th year, celebrating 40 years of diving. She's a beekeeper. We'll hear about that next month. And she's also done some great research, which we'll hear about today, along this about the gyre. So if you never heard of the word gyre, thank you for coming anyway. And if you know what it is, I'm sure you'll get even more information. So without further ado, I turn it over to you, Mary Lou, and thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. So it is my pleasure to share with you one of the most amazing adventures of my life. So the title of this talk is called The North Atlantic Expedition in Search of Plastic. And there was also a documentary made about this adventure called Into the Gyre. And I'll share more about that at the end. So in case you want to look it up and see it on video, you can find it on the internet. So let me start at the beginning. Oh, by the way, can everybody hear me okay? Yep. Okay. All right. So the Sea Education Association was founded in 1971, and it's out of Woods Hole, Massachusetts. And that's where Bob Ballard, the scientist who discovered the Titanic, is from. A lot of great marine research occurs there. It's a fully accredited school for studying abroad, and I was a student there in 1986. And I spent a year sailing with them and then working on board afterwards. And so actually, this should say 39 years of sailing, and 10,000 students later, they have covered a lot of the oceans. And they run three research vessels, or did run three, now they have two, and they're all tall ships. And I'll show you pictures so you'll know what a tall ship is. They have run the most extensive cruise patterns through the Atlantic, documenting plastic pollution. So they have the biggest data set in the world about plastic. So what they wanted to do was figure out the answers to some still burning questions regarding plastic in the oceans. And so they put together the 2010 Plastics at Sea expedition. And it was the first federally funded research expedition dedicated solely to the study of plastic in the ocean, and specifically in the North Atlantic. There are 5 gyres around the planet, and a gyre is basically like a big whirlpool in the ocean. And they rotate in different ways depending what part of the hemisphere they're in. So here is our east coast of the US, and the North Atlantic Gyre is this big patch of ocean here that circulates in a clockwise motion. Okay. So there's 4 others around the world, and they end up concentrating whatever's floating in them because of the way they circulate. So the questions were, well, how large is the North Atlantic potential garbage patch? You may have seen some things online talking about plastic pollution and these garbage patches around the world, and how they're concentrated is through ocean currents. So the question was, is there really a garbage patch out there in the middle of the North Atlantic? And if so, how big is it? How far out off of our coast does it reach? What might happen to the plastic that gets circulated out there? And then some other questions over time. We wanted to bring plastics back and look to see what was growing on them, et cetera, to see how those samples could be used for continuing research. So here was the plan, that we would map plastic concentrations along an almost 4,000-mile cruise track, leaving from Bermuda and heading east. We would sample every 30 miles for almost 4,000 miles. That's a lot of sampling. We would use Newston tows, which is this net right here. We would use a CDT, which is this gadget that collects conductivity. That's with the minerals, et cetera, in the water and how much it conducts, temperature and depth, and collects water samples. And then something called a Tucker trawl, which is this big thing here, and we would drop that down to maybe 1,000 feet and sample things down there. We were also looking at the quantity of plastics that we would find on all of these sampling, or all of these tows. And then also identifying and counting all of the animals that we caught as well, to see what the variety of life was and what species were found along the way. The whole trip was 34 days on board at sea, non-stop, so not returning to land for 34 days. Okay, so the planned track was to leave Bermuda and head straight out about 1,000 miles and then zigzag back to maximize our searching. And the reason that this Gyre area was selected is because if you look on this map here on the left, you'll see all these dots. Those are the thousands of sites that the Sea Education Association had sampled throughout its 39 years and had plenty of plastic data on, but nobody had ever come out here to really see what was going on in the middle of the North Atlantic. So what were we going to sail on to get out there? Well, a tall ship. And here's why. You can use a big researching type of a motorboat that you might see on some documentaries, like the vessels that are used for tagging the great whites, etc. But you really can't carry enough fuel and space for that fuel going 4,000 miles under power. So we use wind. And the best way to harness the wind is have a lot of sail. And these tall ships do that. Plus, they're a whole lot of fun. So this was a brigantine rig, which means it's a two-masted ship, and it has square sails. All brigs have a square sail, or two or three in the front. Okay, and then it has a fore and aft sail at the back, a lot of sail area. It takes a lot of hands to rig this boat. So every time we do a maneuver, sometimes it's all hands on deck just about, to make sure that we've got enough people pulling on these lines and getting things moved around. So she is a 134-foot ship. That's the length overall. That's bowsprit to sternsprit. 98 feet is the length on deck. So that's how much space we had to walk around on. And she's 26 feet wide. Sounds pretty big until you pack about 33 people on it for a month. And then it feels a little small. So she carries about almost 8,000 square feet of sail. Does have a diesel engine. You do need that now and then. And our average hull speed was about 6 knots. Okay, not incredibly fast. So a little bit about life on board before we get into the science. So this is where that saying, we're all in the same boat, really means that. So there were 34 crew total, 33. couple math typos here, I'm sorry. 11 of them were hired and worked for Sea Education Association. So the captain, the mates, the scientists, and of course, the most important person on board is the cook. And then there were 22 sailors, and the sailors were picked strictly from Sea Education alumni. And so when they put this out, they sent emails and notices to all the alumni, and there were over 400 who applied, and they picked 22 of us. So it was an extreme honor to be able to go. And we ranged in age from 21 to 60. So it was quite a variety of folks from all walks of life, all over the United States, having moved on from this experience long ago to coming back to get back on board. Space is very limited. So here's a bunk, and whatever you bring with you, you sleep with. So you really wanted to pack well, things that dried fast, things that weren't that bulky, things you could layer, etc., and be very conscientious because your bunk could get very small very quickly. We were grouped into watches. So on any ship, nobody's asleep. Nope, the boat is never without people awake. So while some are sleeping, others are working, and others then are having their break time. So these watches rotated so that there were 2 long ones and 1 short one, so that you would end up having your different shifts at different times of the day, and it didn't get too monotonous at all. All duties, great and small, are shared. So you would rotate from being the cook's assistant to assisting the engineer in the engine room and changing oil or working on a compressor or fixing a plumbing leak or whatever needed. You would scrub the decks. You really do swab the decks. I mean, when 34 people are crammed on a boat that size, a lot of cleaning goes on. We had science projects every single day, checking the weather, doing navigation, doing repairs. So, and while we were off of our official duties, you know, if you weren't on your watch and you didn't have a science project to do, then there was always something to learn. You know, you could go learn how to do something one of the scientists were doing, or if you liked playing with engine stuff, you could go in the engine room. So there was a lot to do, and you could just enjoy being out in the middle of nowhere, which has a kind of zen feel that you may not get anywhere else. All right, we were not allowed to bring any e-gadgets, so you couldn't have a cell phone with music, watch videos. You were completely unplugged and kind of plugged into this experience, which I think makes it all the more special. All right. So lots of duties on board, like I talked about earlier. And so here's a few pictures of just some things we did. We actually did celestial navigation and got certified to do it. A very fun skill. Haven't used it much since, but sure was fun to learn that. And we did have to climb the rigging and work on sails. That's me throwing a net. And of course we had a little fun. So lots and lots to do. All right, but our main mission was to sample often. So every 30 nautical miles, we threw out this net, and it's called a Newston. And based on the size, which is 1 square meter opening, towed for 1 nautical mile, we could then calculate how much plastic per square mile of ocean we're finding. Okay, so before every tow, we would prep the boat. We had to get on a port tack, which means the sails have to be over to the right side of the boat. so that the wind was on the left, because the net got deployed over the left side of the boat, or the port side. So doing this every 30 miles meant that there wasn't a lot of downtime, because you have to then get ready for the next one. Then once the net comes up, you rinse it and clean every bit of plastic out of it and whatever else other critters you caught. And then we would dry and count every single piece of plastic for that tow. Okay, so sometimes it was over 20,000 pieces. When we averaged how much we found in each of these tows, it translated to approximately 21 pounds of plastic per square mile of open ocean. Now remember, we're out in the middle of nowhere, where we're over almost 1,000 miles from land, yet there's 21 pounds of plastic per square mile floating on the surface of the ocean. It was very sad to learn that there was that much out there, that we have polluted the oceans in places where man rarely travels. So, I'm not sure if this one is showing up correctly. I think I messed up this slide, but the point of showing this is, like, why do we care? Why do we care about what's floating out there? And the point is that anything floating, not only does it can it be ingested by critters that'll eat it, but it also causes other problems. It has toxins in it, so as the sun breaks it down, these toxins get into the water. Animals can hitch rides. So here are some plastic that's got things growing on it. These are an invasive barnacle, okay? And when they can ride on something that floats at the surface, they can go to places they don't belong and cause a lot of damage, kind of like the zebra mussels that are now all over the Great Lakes, things like that. So we cause a lot more damage than what may be obvious. And this was an interesting day. We had one particular tow that we called the bucket tow. And, you know, the net is a square meter wide. And here's a 5-gallon bucket that, with no help from us, just pure luck, landed in our net. And also in the bucket, or swimming with the bucket, were 2 triggerfish. And these are ocean or pelagic triggerfish. They will swim out in the open ocean and hide under things. And so when we sacrifice the fish in order to see what might be going on out here with regards to plastic, both of their stomachs were full of plastic. So again, the impact to these animals out in the middle of nowhere is pretty profound. One of our goals was to find the edge of the plastic pollution coming from the East Coast of the United States. We didn't do that. Sadly, this green dot right here, which is pretty much at the far end of our cruise track, had the highest amount of plastic for our entire trip, which means that there's more out there and that it goes further. When we calculate what we found, that translated from just that hot spot right there to 1,400 pounds of plastic per square kilometer. Keep in mind when I'm sharing these numbers that this is just the little pieces floating on the surface. So imagine all of the plastic that has already sank to the bottom. So we're seeing a very small amount of what we're putting into the oceans, which makes these numbers even more profound. So what's happening now after we've done this 10 years ago? So a lot has continued. Um, the plastic in the marine environment, how much is there? Well, a lot, right? So this data really showed that if you extrapolate or you calculate how much we saw at the surface versus how much is actually being pumped out there, we have a serious problem. And so looking at the sources of the plastic that we found, the types, there's all different types of plastic and what they're made up of and why they float and why they sink and what kind of toxins. So since this trip, a lot of people have spent time on hunting down sources of the plastic so that they can educate and maybe get folks to consider alternatives. Looking at what the impacts are in the marine environment, same thing. So looking at knowing now that certain fish are eating these plastics, et cetera, looking at what's in them and what toxins and how it may impact species is ongoing. Uh, Another question is, what risks do certain plastics pose? So we all know things like straws have a very particular or cause a particular problem, like with sea turtles and animals that might get them stuck in their throat, in their nostrils, etc. Plastics that look like jellyfish, like bags or clear plastic, get eaten a lot by things like turtles. So modifying plastics so that they don't do that any longer is a big deal. Over the past decade now, since this occurred, you've probably noticed that so many places now don't use plastic straws. They have alternatives. That's a big movement. There are also a lot of plastics that have been modified to reduce impact. So plastics made from vegetables and things that will biodegrade have been coming out. And if we look for those things, we can also then, in our own little way, make an impact. So what we do know is that we can't clean up the oceans. It's just cost prohibitive. There's a lot out there, and a lot of it is so small that you can't clean it up. So what we have to do is really control what we're putting out there. And we can all do that by being aware of what we're buying and maybe making different buying choices based on the kind of packaging that our products are in. We can recycle more. Um, and, I really try to do this. This is probably the biggest takeaway for me, is to buy thoughtfully and to use things that have a very low plastic imprint. And that's what I have taken away from that experience, that even though I don't study the science anymore and I'm not a researcher with SEA or in any other way in the marine environment anymore, I was so profoundly impacted that I'm kind of a plastic crusader or anti-plastic crusader, and I try really hard to decrease my plastic footprint. And so I put this picture in here. This is a little trivia, and this is a picture I took on board. And all of our pictures that we gave over to SEA get copyrighted, and then we relinquish our rights to them. So I walked into the Richmond Museum of Natural History a couple years ago, and I'm looking around and I see this picture on the wall, and I said, that looks like my picture. And I walked over to it, and there, sure enough, it was. And they even had my name. So my name is on the wall of the museum. So the reason I'm pointing that out is, well, it's kind of cool to walk in and see your name on the wall of the museum, sure. But the fact is that even in Richmond, here in, near us, plastic education is getting out there. And the point that, our animals shouldn't be eating plastic for dinner. And so what can we do to help eliminate pictures like this, where plastic is getting into our streams and then into our ocean and out into our environment? If you want to see a little bit more about this really cool research project, you can Google Into the Gyre, and it is a movie. It was actually won some awards, I think, and I'm in it a little bit, teeny bit, but you'll see a lot of amazing people in there. And yeah, you will, I think, enjoy it. And so that's pretty much my presentation, and I'm ready to answer any questions you might have.
I'm going to stop that sharing if that's all right, then, Mary Lou.
Sure. Yeah, if I figure out how.
No, I already did.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Wow, that's eye-opening. Anybody have any questions or comments? You can unmute yourself or you can write them in the chat.
That was very interesting. Thank you. How big was the net, did you say, or whatever the instrument that you put down into the water? What were the measurements again on that?
It's a square meter. So it was a meter across and a foot high. So it was like, yeah, like 1 square meter, or that was gosh, I can't remember exactly the inches, or
it's like it's a little over 3 feet.
Length and height, but the surface area that it covered was 1 square meter.
Well, thank you. I need to go now, but I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Thanks for joining.
Okay.
Lucy, do you have a question or comment?
Well, I'm trying to get a little bit more information, because just recently my granddaughter, who's highly allergic skin-wise to all kinds of things, was looking for face masks that did not contain materials that had plastic in them. That was not an easy project, but we found some in Canada and ordered them. And the company is very interesting because they have a multitude of all kinds of plastic-free everything, detergents, hair, conditioners. We did get the face masks. And I'm just interested if you know any other sources other than the obvious things that would help us as consumers make better choices.
Yeah, being able to make better choices is, I think, critical, and having companies be transparent about what's in their products is necessary in order for us to do that.
Do you know of any companies, Mary Lou, like that, your go-to things for alternative?
Well, I use a lot of what's considered like green products, where the packaging is reusable. Like you'll get like I started using these little sheets for laundry soap. They're like little sheets of soap, and they come in a paper container and instead of a bottle of liquid, and you just put that sheet in, and it's a concentrated dry soap and works great, and there's no big plastic bottle.
Mary Lou, I've used that too.
You like them?
Yeah, I use that too. I think it's called True Earth, and
there's a few out there now.
So, Canada. Yeah,
because you look at the grocery store and you see these big bottles of laundry detergent, and I mean, these are big plastic bottles, and that's the kind of plastic that as it breaks down, it floats and breaks apart, and it doesn't biodegrade in a landfill either. So so just Googling alternatives to or low I guess there's all kinds of things we can ask, but I look for products that have like zero plastic or such a small amount of waste that I could like compost it. Like I think even those soap products, they come in a paper container that's compostable.
There is a question, Martha Jefferson. So go ahead.
Ongoing project, and if it is,
I can't
how
hear.
long is it? A resident wants to know if this is a long going project, and if so, how long is it?
Can you restate it, Carolyn? I couldn't hear them.
So I just wanted to know if this project that you were on is still ongoing, and if so, how long is it going on?
Okay, so that was a one-time expedition to that extent, but the Sea Education Association is still functioning and taking trips regularly. In fact, they're out there right now. You could go to the SCA website and you can see their current cruise tracks and their current research projects. But on every single cruise, regardless of the actual mission, like my first cruise, I studied something called mesopelagic fishes. Those are the animals that are down at about 1,000 feet. But on every single cruise, they looked for the plastic. And that's because even 30 years ago, plastics were already being noticed, and they had the foresight to start to develop a database. So they are planning some more of these expeditions, and they actually did one in the Pacific after this. I think they did it in 2014. So yes, the research is ongoing. And hopefully it will show that at some point, the amount of plastic we saw here would be less. And if so, that would mean that we're doing better at keeping it out of the oceans. I don't know how long that'll take, but that's the goal.
A couple of people, Lucy Burnett said the site that they found was ETEE, E-T-E-E.
Oh, I'm writing this down.
Okay. It's also in the chat for anybody interested. And then Pat mentioned Drops with 2 Ps, D-R-O-P-P-S is another company that sells laundry soap and dishwater soap in cardboard containers.
Excellent.
No plastic. You can find it online. I have a quick question. You know, I guess for me, and this is my naivete, when I think of plastics, I think of like that big 5-gallon bucket or a big thing of Dawn dish soap, whatever you're talking. I saw it was the average, like the head of a pencil, the size of the plastic bits. So, but I'm assuming at some point they were larger objects and they've been broken down.
Many of them. But then there was a picture I showed like of a little spout from a squirt bottle, like
like a dishwashing liquid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So and lids, those kinds of things are particularly bad because birds eat them. So some of you may have seen pictures in documentaries, et cetera, of bird stomachs, and there's many kinds of seabirds that mistake these little pieces of plastic for food items, and then their guts fill with plastic and they can't pass them, and then they starve to death because they can't digest anything else. So lids and these small objects are really, really detrimental. Those that break down, have the same effect as putting out a small item. You know, over time it breaks down into the small items. Something you probably also have seen is the connectors that hold like soda 6-packs together and how much damage they can do to some animals. So some companies now have come out with biodegradable ones and those that don't stay in a ring so an animal can't get their head caught.
Yes, we always, if we're going to do that, get sodas or whatever, we always cut those. But still those smaller pieces, and then I'll stop talking. And like the lids you mentioned, all those are oftentimes the things that they won't take in recycled plastic.
Right. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. So, you know, I guess a good way to stop having to deal with them is just to, you know, vote with your wallet kind of thing, and just don't buy products that have that packaging. And I know it's hard when it's a product you really like, but I've also written to manufacturers and said, you know, I love your product. I just hate how you package it. Can you do better? Um,
Couple other people are, oh, yep, there we go. Tom had a question. I see a couple people unmuted themselves. Are you looking at the chat, Marilyn?
yes. So
Okay.
one, Tom says, is there any pending legislation to require eco-friendly packaging? Not in the United States, not yet. I think we could take a page from a couple other countries who have done much better at that. You know, some places they don't allow plastic bags at all. You bring your own. And plastic bags are one of the worst things that we're putting out there. So I would love to see that. I think if you don't enforce it at the top level and everyone's on their own to try to make this happen, it's not going to have the impact it would if we were kind of forced into it at a more global scale. That's my 2 cents. Somebody asked if you could go again, would you go again? Absolutely. Yeah, I would.
We've been talking about consumer goods. Is there some way of telling whether these plastic bits come from an industrial plant versus?
Yes, there's something called what is it, nurdles or something. There's a little tiny plastic, basically the seed of larger plastic items. And those we separated out to determine the origin, because that goes right to the manufacturer of that plastic. So determining how some of this got into the oceans was one of the projects. And so going back to some of these places and say, hey, how is your product entering the system? And we had a couple of amazing students or people on board who were environmental scientists. One was an environmental lawyer. So they were running with those projects after the expedition to see if they could do a paper that would then allow them to constructively go back to some of these places and see if they could impact change. Nurdles, that's the word. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
So Tom asked a good question right above that. And then there was another one too, just from Kendra.
So there's a question about separating plastic and putting it in a recycle bin versus, mixing it into single stream. I think that whether that helps or not depends on the area and the facilities. Some facilities are sophisticated enough to separate out single stream trash collection, and others are definitely not. So I think we would have to each check how our local sites are dealing with our trash and then try to modify our behavior to make it, to do our best to help them to deal with it. And I separate because even though I heard Charlottesville area was single stream, I live in the county, and then I learned that a lot of the stuff that should be put in the recycle bin wasn't getting picked out, so now I do it myself. What else there?
Let's see, Kendra put another, this is great. There's all these, we're at how can we help? And Kendra's got
True
that.
Earth, I'm writing these down.
The dishwasher pod is called If You Care and comes in a small cardboard box.
Nice.
Yes, and their shampoo, conditioner, it looks like little soap bars.
Yep. Yes, I started using those without sulfates and those other bad chemicals in them too. Yeah. What else?
One other question, again, I'm stuck on the big objects, but I've seen, a group of brothers or a boat that was specially designed to pick up plastics in the ocean. Is that going on? Does that make a big difference when you're talking about the sheer volume of ocean we have? Or is that just kind of like a Band-Aid in your mind?
It's kind of like a Band-Aid because, again, we don't know what's sinking, but the belief is that what's floating is a very small percentage compared to what ends up sinking. And so in certain areas, it can help where it's densely packed at the surface, which wind and currents do in some areas that are close to really concentrated areas of pollution. So shorelines where there's big cities where a lot of waste, especially after a storm, dumps a lot into the ocean. So then I think those cleanup systems can help a bit, but there's it's not it's not going to be the answer for sure. We're going to miss so much if that's what we rely on is, collecting it after it gets out there. We have to stop it first. So I think everybody knows that. It's just how do we convert? I mean, in healthcare, everything we use almost is disposable because of patient safety. So a lot gets incinerated to keep it out of the landfills. But we don't do a good job of inspiring people to recycle. I remember as a kid in Buffalo in Canada, you go to Canada because I grew up on the border, and you would get 5 cents or whatever for a bottle. And we don't do that here. I mean, you could inspire every kid to go pick up bottles if there was a, recycling reward. And so a lot of countries do that, and we do not.
Another question from Tom. Virginia is a leader in the clean energy program. Is there an opportunity to lobby the legislature to also lead on eco-friendly packaging?
I would bet there is. I am not involved a lot politically, and lobbying is something that I would get behind for sure if there were people out there doing it. I think the problem is, how do you lobby for something that doesn't make money? And so we have to incentivize people to do that somehow, I would think, economically. So how can eco-friendly packaging, which is probably at this point is more expensive to make, how can that, how do we inspire that to be something the legislature would support? I don't know the answer, and maybe you have some ideas that would, you'd be willing to share, but I watch for things I can get behind, and I would get behind that. I just don't know how I would personally lead something like that.
Anybody else? Any questions or comments? I know I learned a ton.
All right, well, it was a pleasure to speak with you all. Thank you for tuning in to listen to this. Yeah, and if you do come up with any other questions or thoughts on it, if you share with Carolyn, she can reach out to me.
Yes, indeed. And thank you so much. It was very lovely to hear about some of the products, and I really do appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks everybody for chiming in on that. I'm grateful, and I'm going to have I'm going to do some shopping now.
And so yeah, a couple of other comments too. I'll share the chat with you, Marilou, but a lot to think about how we can personally make a difference. And it is, you do get energized. I agree, Kendra, to better the environment. When we hear things like this, just educating is a huge step. You just never know where that's going to go with one person or a group, or just a good thing to do. So we thank you for taking the time to do that with us.
I think more education about the harm that it's creating would be beneficial.
Yeah, and I debated about putting in some of those terrible pictures about, with animals with terrible wounds and dead birds and things. And, that wasn't part of the expedition. So I didn't go there, but I think we've all seen those things. And maybe we need to see more of it to inspire us. But yeah, it's very sad.
Us to get out and solve this problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, but I have to say, I'm very proud of myself when I can go to the garbage can once a week with one small bag of stuff that I compost, and I try to use very little plastic. So I try to push myself to generate as little waste as possible. So that's my personal, I challenge myself with that.
A similar challenge, and I have a wonderful compost pile.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot.
Yeah.
And it's just wonderful black dirt to garden with next spring.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And the McIntyre Recycling Center now takes compost.
Oh, cool.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. So if you don't have room for a compost pile, you can separate it out and bring it to them?
Mm-hmm.
Right at the front, right as you go in.
Nice. I did not know that. Thank you.
Compostable bags, but they'll supply
good,
them if you don't have them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like even grocery stores now, you may notice that some of them have the plastic bags to put your veggies in that say biodegradable and others don't. So, I like to shop where they have those bags. So, all that makes a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think some of the stores are taking the plastic bags back. I'm not real sure what they're doing with them. I know that park benches can be made from plastic bags.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Really attractive.
Yeah. A lot can be if we can get it all back into that recycling stream. But, it is still, it's going to be hard to use plastic in the quantities we do and ever get all of it back into recycling. So I still think coming up with alternatives in the first place is better whenever we can.
Good.
I don't know if anyone lives near in Ivy, near the Ivy landfill, but their recycling area there is now almost identical to the McIntyre one. And so they have the big bins that have, plastic 1 and 2, and they also do plastic film, which includes those plastic garbage bags, so I've been trying to do that, but it's hard to have enough space in your house to, have all the different recycle containers. So anyway.
Yeah, it is a job, but thank you for sharing that, because just knowing that there's a place to put it and should help some people feel better about the effort going into separating it and driving it there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if anybody thinks about any ways to educate, I'd be all over getting behind that as well, to the greater population. So thanks, Marilou. Thank you all for coming.
All right. Have a
very, very interesting. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.